Why did the cold feel familiar, almost like an old enemy she'd met before? The thought flickered through her mind the second her body hit the river, vanishing into darkness that swallowed everything: sound, light, even the memory of air. For a moment, the world was only pressure and silence. Savannah Price didn't thrash. She didn't panic. She didn't even open her eyes right away. She simply counted the way she'd done 1,000 times in training pools across different corners of the world. 1 second, two, three. The current spun her sideways, slamming her shoulder against a submerged rock, but even that pain felt distant, muffled under the roar of freezing water. She'd been here before, not this river, not this continent, but this moment, this sudden theft of control was familiar. Fear pressed in like a tight fist, but she kept it from closing. The river wanted her panic. Panic burned oxygen. Panic made people claw toward the surface too soon. Panic got people killed. She wasn't here to die. Not yet. She was still sinking, the pressure tightening around her ribs. Her lungs already hurt from the cold shock, but she forced her heartbeat slower. She'd conditioned herself for this: hours lying motionless at the bottom of heated pools, hours floating under Arctic ice sheets during winter operations. Fear wasn't new. Fear was just information. Above her, the world she'd been thrown from was already fatting. The bridge, the men, their laughter, their certainty that she was dead. That certainty still pulsed in her ears louder than the current. They thought they'd erased her. An aid worker, a nobody, a woman who should have broken before the interrogations even started. But the river didn't care who she was. It didn't know her name. It didn't know what she'd survived so far. It only cared about one thing: whether she could endure. Savannah opened her eyes. The water was black, the kind of darkness that felt dense, almost touchable. Tiny sparks of air spiraled upward from her clothes, ripples of her own fatting warmth leaving her behind. 4, 5, 6. Her mind flickered for a moment to the 3 days before this, the small room where light bulbs buzzed like hornets, the metal table she was tied to, the voice asking the same questions over and over, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to say something she couldn't afford to say. She given them nothing. They'd mistaken that silence for weakness. They always did. But the silence wasn't fear, it was strategy. Her ribs ached again. Not pain, just pressure. Her lips stung from where they'd split during the last interrogation. She remembered the moment they dragged her from the room, the words she'd whispered before they threw her over the railing. "You're making a mistake." She meant it, but they'd laughed. They thought the river would finish their job for them. They thought she'd disappear into an anonymous death, carried miles away until no one ever knew what happened. Savannah bent her knees slightly, adjusting her posture the way she'd been trained to when descending uncontrollably. The current was pulling fast, faster than she wanted, but speed meant distance. Distance meant survival. 7, 8, 9. The cold started to seep into her fingers, turning the tips numb. That was the first real warning. Hypothermia wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, patient. It hollowed you out from the inside while you were too busy trying to breathe. She let the current drag her lower until her boots scraped gravel. The riverbed. It meant she descended at least 15 feet. She pushed off gently, keeping herself controlled, drifting with the current instead of fighting it. Her lungs tightened. The familiar burn was comforting in a strange way, a signal she'd entered stage 1, nothing dangerous yet. She could hold much longer. People liked to think breath holding was physical. It was. It was mental. It was willingness to sit inside the discomfort without letting it become panic. And discomfort, she'd learned long ago, was temporary. Her mind flicked dangerously to the thought she'd shoved away earlier. What if they're still watching? Men like Volkov didn't trust the river to do their work unless they saw final proof. She couldn't surface too soon. They'd shoot her the second her head broke the water, or worse, capture her again. And this time they wouldn't underestimate her. She angled her body, swimming deeper into the darkness. 10, 11, 12. Her heart slowed in response to the cold, mammalian dive reflex kicking in. She welcomed it. Every lowered beat was another second of life. The current grew gentler at this depth, almost giving her time to think. She hated thinking right now, because in the quiet, memories had space to grow. Memories of something she hadn't told her team before she deployed. Something she hadn't told anyone. A secret that had quietly eaten at her resolve in the days before the mission. A feeling she couldn't shake, like she'd already failed before she even started. She pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time. 13, 14, 15. Her chest trembled. Not panic, just the body's instinct pleading for air. She ignored it. She felt it before. In cold training pools at 4 a.m. she knew exactly how long she could last after this. Near the surface, the current thundered loud. Down here it was quieter, almost peaceful. Savannah felt the shift in temperature, the subtle slope of the river floor beneath her hands. The current was changing, meaning the river was bending ahead. Good. That bend might hide her from anyone watching the surface. A shadow flickered overhead, maybe a vehicle crossing the bridge. Maybe someone leaning over the railing to confirm she didn't surface. She stayed deep, unmoving. 16, 17. How ironic, she thought. After everything they did, after everything they said, I'm more alive right now than they'll ever understand. The burn in her lungs sharpened. Her body was asking for a plan. She gave it one. She angled upward slightly, just enough to catch the slower current near the middle depth. Her boots grazed a large boulder and she used it to push herself downstream faster. 18, 19, 20. She felt the moment the river curved. The current tugged her sideways, swirling her into a long, sweeping arc. Good. The bridge was behind her now, out of sight, out of danger. Now she needed air. Her heartbeat thudded once slow, heavy, followed by a wave of heat spreading across her chest, the classic signal of rising CO2 levels. Hypoxia stage 1 drifting toward stage 2, not yet dangerous but getting there. She kicked upward. The black water brightened to a gray haze. Her fingers stretched toward it. Another kick, another. Then suddenly softness, air, sky. And for the first time in 8 long minutes, Savannah broke the surface and exhaled. The breath didn't sound like relief. It sounded like defiance. She forced her breathing calm, 4 seconds in, 2 hold, 6 out, while her eyes scanned the riverbank. No shadows, no voices, no gunshots. They truly believed she was dead. Good. That meant the river hadn't just kept her alive. It had given her something no training ever could. A chance to finish what they started. A cold shiver ran through her spine as she grabbed an overhanging root, pulling herself toward the bank. Her arms trembled, not weakness, not fear, just the beginning edges of hypothermia settling in. She could fight it. She would fight it. As she dragged herself onto the rocks, soaked and freezing, one bitter thought clung to her. They didn't know who they threw away. And the mountain wasn't done with them yet. Why did the wind feel sharper now, as if the mountains themselves were testing her resolve? Savannah steadied her breath, her fingers digging into the cold earth as her body shuddered violently. Not fear, not weakness, the first real bite of hypothermia. It crept in quietly, but she recognized every stage. She'd trained in colder water than this, but never after 3 days of captivity, never after being beaten, starved, and thrown off a bridge like discarded trash. She tried to stand and nearly stumbled. Her boots squelched, water still pouring from them. Her shirt clung to her skin like ice-soaked armor. The wind sliced through every layer, trying to take what little warmth she had left. Move, she told herself. Don't give it time to win. Movement was life, stillness was death. She forced herself upright, her breath coming in small clouds that dissolved into the fading daylight. The river roared behind her, as if daring her to slip back in. But she pushed forward, climbing through thorned brush that snagged her wet clothes. Every few steps she stole a glance back up the river, half expecting shadows on the bridge, half expecting men with rifles scanning for her, half expecting headlights cutting through the mountain air. But the world was silent. She could almost believe she was alone, the only living thing in a place carved out of rock and ice. But she wasn't alone. Not yet. Because somewhere up that mountain road, 12 armed men thought she was dead. And her survival wasn't just a surprise. It was leverage. It was her advantage, the only one she had. She started moving parallel to the road, staying hidden among the trees where the shadows deepened. Her body trembled violently again. She clenched her teeth, holding herself steady. She had maybe an hour before cold started affecting her decision-making, 2 before her muscles stiffened enough to slow her down. She needed heat, and there was only one way to get it. Walk, move, force the blood to remember what it's supposed to do. Her breath grew harsher. The forest smelled like pine and iron, like the world after a storm. Somewhere above her, the last strip of sunlight bled orange through the tree line. She hated that light. It meant time was running out. Night in the mountains didn't forgive errors. She stepped over a fallen log, clutching her arms to her chest. The thin shirt was no protection against the cold. Even her muscles felt fragile, like they might tear if she pushed them too hard. She needed warmth, or fire, or even friction. Savannah reached for the edges of her training, old lessons from cold weather survival courses in Alaska, moments she'd hated at the time but thanked now. Warmth isn't a luxury, it's a strategy. She dropped to her knees, forcing herself into a set of fast, shallow squats. 1, 2, 3. Her legs trembled, nearly buckling beneath her. But after 30 seconds, warmth sparked somewhere deep inside her thighs, small but real, fighting back against the cold gnawing at her bones. Then jumping jacks, slow at first, then faster, ignoring the sharp sting of freezing clothes slapping her skin. Her heart rate climbed, her breath quickened. The trembling eased, not gone but controlled. She kept counting under her breath. Numbers helped. Counting reminded her that she was still here, still thinking, still alive. When her breath leveled, she started walking again. The road curved upward, snaking through the mountains like a scar. She stayed 40 meters inside the tree line, keeping the asphalt in sight but never stepping onto it. Too exposed, too risky. She needed to reach that warehouse before nightfall. Needed warmth, shelter, food. But she needed something else too. Vengeance wasn't the right word. Closure wasn't either. It was something deeper, something she didn't want to name yet. They had taken something from her in that interrogation room. Not information, not compliance. Something more fragile. Something closer to dignity. And she wanted it back. Branches scratched her arms as she moved faster, drawing thin lines of blood that she barely felt. Her breathing wasn't steady. The cold still clung to her lungs. She tried not to think about the river, about the moment she broke the surface, not because of fear, but because she knew her mind was trying to drift away, to replay moments she couldn't afford to examine right now. 3 days tied to a chair. 3 days listening to their questions. 3 days holding onto one truth that could never be revealed. She hadn't told them everything. She hadn't told her team everything either. Some missions required secrets even from your own. And this mission, this cover, was built on layers of lie and truth so thinly separated that sometimes she forgot which was which. A branch cracked nearby. Savannah dropped instantly into a crouch, heart seizing, not in fear but readiness. She scanned the trees, her breath held for a moment. Wind. Just wind. Or she hoped it was. Her mind was fraying around the edges, not from panic but from hunger, cold, exhaustion. She needed discipline now more than ever. She pushed on. After nearly an hour of movement, 20 minutes fast, 2 minutes exercise, repeat, the trees began to thin. The grade steepened. She could feel the altitude in her lungs now, a sharp burn that cut deep. She welcomed it. Pain meant circulation. Circulation meant warmth. Her clothes were no longer drowning wet, just damp. Her shirt still clung to her skin like a cold second layer, but the worst had passed. Her limbs felt heavy but responsive, her mind clearer than before. The forest opened slightly, revealing a ridge line. She stopped, steadying herself against a tree. From here she had a line of sight down the winding road. And there, tiny figures moving, were the SUVs, 3 of them, black, familiar. She watched them disappear behind a curve, heading toward the warehouse compound she knew lay miles ahead. She traced their path with her eyes, knowing they were confident, relaxed, maybe laughing about the woman they'd thrown away. Her nails dug into the bark of the tree. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, it was ignorance, dangerous kind. She had a choice now. Follow close, risk getting spotted, or stay back and trust the predictability of men who believed the job was done. She stayed back. Her legs ached as she continued moving. She could feel the muscles tightening from cold. She forced them loose with movement, shaking them out every few minutes. She didn't have the luxury of stopping. If she stopped too long, her temperature would drop again. As she climbed another steep incline, her breath caught, half from the effort, half from the memory that surged without warning. A hand on her shoulder. A quiet voice in the interrogation room. A question she hadn't expected. "Why are you alone? Where is your team?" She had answered with silence. Not because of strength, but because she wasn't sure anymore what team meant, or if she still deserved one. She shoved the memory down before it could unravel more. Not now. Later. If she survived, she'd unpack it then. The mountains grew darker, shadows lengthened. Her boots slipped on loose stones more than once. Her breath came in sharp pulls, but the cold was no longer winning. She could feel sweat forming under her shirt now, a sign she was warming up too fast. Dangerous. Heat lost through damp fabric would double at night. She slowed her pace, regulating herself. Smart, not reckless. Somewhere far above, a crow screeched, its cry echoing through the gorge like a warning. Savannah pushed on. Then she saw it. The warehouse compound, still distant, still small, but unmistakably real. Gray concrete, rusted gates. The 3 SUVs parked inside. Guards packing lazily, rifles slung casually. They believed the mountains kept them safe. They believed the river had killed her. But the river had only taught her something important. Survival wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, cold, methodical. She crouched behind a cluster of rocks, watching the compound with the same stillness she'd learned underwater. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. She should have felt anger. She should have felt fear. But she only felt one thing: resolve. Because what they didn't know yet, what they couldn't even imagine, was that a woman they thought the river had swallowed was now walking straight toward them. And she wasn't coming as a ghost. She was coming as the consequence they never prepared for. What if the silence around her wasn't safety, but the calm before something worse? Savannah crouched deeper behind the rocks, her breath quiet against the cold evening air. The compound was still distant but close enough for her to study. Her pulse steadied, settling into the same slow rhythm she used before deepwater dives. That same calm, that same deliberate quiet. She watched the guards for several long minutes, men smoking near the gate, another packing lazily along the perimeter, 2 more sitting on crates, talking, oblivious to the forest in front of them. Evening light washed the mountain in muted blue, the kind that made outlines softer but danger sharper. Her eyes traced everything: patterns, behaviors, blind spots. They looked bored, relaxed. They had no idea the woman they discarded into the river was now breathing the same cold air they were, watching them with a patience she didn't know she still possessed. A strange ache crept into her chest, something she hadn't felt since before deployment. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something quieter, more human. The kind of feeling she tried to bury under training and discipline. Weariness. Not physical, that she could power through. This was different. It was the tiredness of someone who had carried more weight than she was willing to admit, of someone who hadn't let herself process anything for months, maybe years. She didn't want to feel that now. So she focused on the compound, letting the cold numb the parts of her she didn't want to face. The warehouse was built like a bunker, old Soviet architecture, thick concrete, one main structure with two smaller outbuildings, a single road in, a steep cliff on the opposite side. It was isolated by design. It reminded her of something she'd once said during training. Isolation isn't dangerous unless the people inside know how to use it. These men didn't. They relied on walls and distance, not discipline, and that was their mistake. Her breath fogged faintly as she leaned closer to the edge of the rocks. Her fingers traced the ground, dry dirt, loose gravel. She tested her weight on it. It held firm. She could move through this terrain silently if careful. But she wasn't ready to move yet. Not until she steadied her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel her heartbeat slowing again, returning to that controlled rhythm she'd practiced underwater. In, hold, out, reset. But the quiet opened a door in her mind she had been avoiding. A memory she wished she hadn't carried with her to this mountain. A face. A voice. Someone she once trusted too deeply. Savannah, you don't always have to be the strong one. She hated that she remembered that now. She forced her eyes open, grounding herself in the cold air, the scent of pine, the distant murmur of guards laughing at something stupid. Strength wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. And she had too much to do to let emotion scratch at her defenses. She crawled along the ridge, keeping low. The cold stung her hands each time they touched the ground, but she welcomed the sting. It meant she still had sensation, still had circulation. The forest thickened slightly as she moved, offering more cover. She found a fallen tree trunk and used it as a vantage point, peering over the bark toward the compound. She stayed still for long seconds, studying the pattern again. 4 guards outside. At least 8 inside the warehouse. Weapons everywhere. Her breathing slowed even more. This would be nearly impossible for a team of 4. She was one person. Exhausted. Half-frozen. Unarmed. An intrusive whisper seeped into her thoughts, uninvited and quiet. Why are you doing this alone? Her jaw tightened. Because she had no choice. Because no one was coming. Because she was the only one who had seen the shipment schedule, the trafficking routes, the names she overheard in captivity. And because if she failed, people far from this mountain would die. Families, villages, entire communities caught between wars they never asked to be part of. And maybe because part of her wanted to finish this for reasons beyond the mission. Maybe she wanted to confront the fear that had trailed her quietly for years, the fear that one day she would break, that one day her training wouldn't be enough. She slid her hand under her shirt and placed 2 fingers on her ribs, still cold but warming slowly. Her breathing remained steady. The river was far behind her now, but its echo still clung to her skin. She survived it. And she wasn't done surviving. Savannah scanned the perimeter again, and that's when she saw movement, subtle, quick, from the far right outbuilding, a man stepping out, adjusting his rifle, taller than the others, more alert, not communicating with anyone, just watching the forest. Watching her side of the forest. Her spine stiffened. Did he see something? Hear something? Sense something? Her body pressed tight against the ground, barely breathing as he scanned the tree line. His eyes lingered on the ridge where she'd been seconds earlier, too close, too perceptive. Her fingers curled into the dirt. Her heart didn't race, it went still, dead quiet. The man stared a few moments longer, then flicked his cigarette into the dirt and walked back toward the building, disappearing inside. The door clanged shut behind him. She didn't move for a full minute. Only when her lungs started to scream did she let herself breathe again. Close, too close. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pushed herself upright. Not fear, just adrenaline fatting, but she didn't miss what that moment meant. They weren't entirely blind. They weren't invincible in their complacency. This would be harder than she thought. Her body tensed as a new sound reached her, distant, rhythmic, mechanical. She froze, listening. It wasn't a vehicle, it wasn't footsteps. A generator. A low hum vibrated through the mountain air, coming from somewhere behind the main warehouse. That explained the power to the lights flickering inside. That generator might be her leverage, or her risk. She shifted forward, calculating. A generator meant a fuel line, possibly an exposed intake vent, noise that could mask her own movements. Opportunity. Every mission had a hinge point, a small detail that turned everything. She had just found hers. She scanned the terrain until her eyes caught the drainage culvert, a concrete pipe barely wide enough for a person, running under the fence and into the heart of the compound. Her throat tightened. That was her entry. But she had to reach it first. And to reach it, she needed to descend the ridge, cross the open forest clearing, and slip into the culvert without being seen. Her breath steadied. Her heartbeat leveled. Her mind sharpened with icy clarity. She started to climb down. Halfway down the ridge, her foot slipped on loose gravel, sending a small cascade of stones tumbling. She froze mid-step, heart in her throat. The stones clattered softly down the incline, echoed faintly, stopped. She waited. A voice shouted from the compound. She stiffened instantly. A flashlight beam swept across the fence line, searching. She pressed against a tree, barely breathing. Her pulse thudded once, slow and controlled, but her muscles coiled tight. Seconds dragged like hours. Finally, the light moved away. The voices quieted, and she exhaled the breath she'd held too long. She continued down. By the time she reached the clearing, her clothes were dry enough not to squeak, her muscles warm enough to obey without trembling, her mind clear enough to focus on one thing: getting inside. She crouched low, slipping through the trees until she reached the culvert's mouth, dark, cold, dripping. She knelt beside it, testing the edge of the concrete. Just wide enough to crawl through. Just narrow enough to trap her if she hesitated. She placed her hands on the rim, ready to enter. And for one brief moment, a moment she didn't expect, she heard her own heartbeat loud against her ribs, and a question echoed through her mind. What if this time you don't make it out? She closed her eyes. Then she crawled into the darkness anyway. Why did the darkness inside the tunnel feel tighter than the river had? Like it wasn't trying to kill her, but trying to swallow her whole. Savannah crawled forward on her elbows, every inch of movement echoing faintly through the narrow concrete pipe. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Cold water pooled along the bottom, soaking the front of her shirt again. A metallic taste filled the air, rust, dampness, decay. Her breath scraped the tunnel walls, the sound too loud in the confined space. Too vulnerable. It reminded her of the old seer escape mazes, how instructors would seal you in tight crawl spaces to see what fear did to your mind. She had hated those drills, not because she feared tight spaces, but because the silence forced her to face things she avoided. It was harder to outrun your own thoughts when they bounced back at you from concrete walls. She kept moving. Her hands burned with cold again. She ignored it. Ahead, faint moonlight leaked through the far end of the culvert, a soft glow promising she was still alive, still moving toward danger and toward purpose. Halfway through, her knee clipped a jagged bolt sticking out of the concrete. She stifled a hiss, biting the inside of her cheek. Blood trickled warm down her shin. She paused, breathing steady, mind quiet, not because she felt safe, but because stopping too long meant the cold would claim her again. She pushed onward. The pipe tightened near the end. She had to drop her head lower, sliding forward inch by inch until finally, blessedly, she reached the exit. She stopped just before the opening, listening. Voices. Steps. A radio crackling. Savannah froze, every muscle locking in place. One wrong movement, one sound, one moment of impatience, and they would find her lodged like prey in a steel throat. She angled her head, listening. The voices weren't close. Guard shack, most likely, not the maintenance shed near her position. Good. A small margin. Enough to breathe. She slid out quietly, rolling onto her side and pressing herself flat against the cold dirt behind a stack of rusted metal drums. The smell hit her immediately: oil, gasoline, sweat. The place felt lived in, unprofessional, sloppily guarded, a smug kind of carelessness. Their arrogance had kept her alive more than once tonight. She lifted her head just enough to scan the area. The storage shed sat 15 meters to her right. The main warehouse loomed another 30 beyond that, its windows glowing faintly with yellow light. Shadows moved inside, men packing, arguing, distracted. She counted transitions, tracked footsteps, measured blind spots. Every movement mattered now, every breath. Her lungs tightened as her heart surged with adrenaline, not fear, readiness. She moved. Staying low, she slid between the stacked drums, each one cold against her back as she guided her movements to match the rhythm of the generator's rumble. She'd used machinery noise as cover before, on ships, on docks, during night infiltrations. Sound could hide sound if you timed it right. She reached the maintenance shed's shadow and pressed herself against the wall, listening again. No movement inside, no voices, just the hum of equipment and the metallic creak of old hinges shifting in the cold. She slipped inside. Darkness. Tools scattered along the walls. A faint draft sneaking in through a cracked window. The smell of rusted iron and stale air. Her eyes adjusted quickly. She scanned for anything, a weapon, leverage, even a distraction device. Anything she could use. There. A crowbar. 2 feet long. Heavy enough to crush skull, silent enough to keep her alive. She slid it quietly into her grip, the cold metal biting her palm. Not ideal, but better than bare hands. Something inside her steadied. She wasn't helpless now. Still outnumbered. Still underarmed. But no longer defenseless. And sometimes the smallest weapon created the biggest shift inside a person. Her heartbeat eased, her breathing steadied. She stepped out of the shed, using its shadow to scan the next steps. The first patrol would cross the courtyard in 15 seconds. She'd timed it earlier. The second would pass the generator in 30. The gate guards wouldn't see her if she stayed low and moved in the blind spot behind the storage shed. 15 seconds wasn't much time. But she'd learned not to overthink time. Time belonged to discipline, not fear. She moved. The patrol guard approached from around the corner, rifle slung lazily. He wasn't watching. He wasn't expecting. He wasn't ready. She struck fast, crowbar to the base of his skull, the sound dull and final. He dropped instantly, collapsing into her arms. She lowered him silently, stripping his rifle and checking the chamber. Loaded. Full magazine. Her breath hitched, not from fear but from clarity. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the prisoner. She wasn't the woman thrown into the river. She was the consequence of underestimating her. She dragged the body behind the shed, covering it with a tarp, One less threat, no alarms yet, no shouts, no eyes on her. The compound felt quieter now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that sharpened the edges of everything. She advanced, keeping the rifle low, avoiding sight lines. Her clothes were dry enough to not betray her. Her muscles warm enough to obey without trembling. Her mind sharp as the cold steel in her hand. She moved toward the main warehouse's side door, a small metal entry used for maintenance. The window beside it was dirty, grimy, streaked with age. She rose onto her toes just enough to peer inside. Volkov. He stood near a table stacked with weapons crates, his movements sharp with agitation. Two men flanked him, rifles slung tight, eyes scanning the place as if they sensed something wrong, but didn't know what. Savannah's pulse didn't quicken. It dropped. Steady. Cold. Focused. Seeing him again didn't trigger fear. Didn't trigger anger. It triggered something quieter, heavier, something like memory. The moment he'd laughed. The moment he'd ordered her thrown into the river. The moment he'd mistaken her silence for defeat. She pulled back from the window, crouching low. She had a choice now, engage quietly or spark chaos. Her breath caught. A thought surfaced, unexpected, unwelcome. You don't have to do this alone. But she shoved it down. Because she wasn't doing this alone. Her training was with her. Her discipline. Her purpose. Every instructor who ever demanded more from her. Every mission she'd survived. Every moment she'd endured alone. That was her team. She moved toward the fuel cans outside the shed, old metal ones, dented, stained. Dangerous, useful. A single plan crystallized in her mind, not reckless, but bold enough to give her the advantage she needed. Noise. Fire. Chaos. Confusion. Then control. She positioned the cans strategically, timing her movements with the distant rumble of the generator and the drifting voices from the guards. Her breath steamed faintly in the cold, her fingers tightened around the rifle. She wasn't ready. She was beyond ready. She had been ready since the moment she surfaced from that river. She aimed at the cans, exhaled once, and a guard stepped into view. Too close. Too sudden. Too silent. He hadn't seen her yet. She dropped instantly to one knee, heart steady as stone, rifle angled up, breath held. 1 second. 2. 3. The guard turned his head, just enough for his eyes to sweep the area. He would see her. He would shout. He would end everything. Unless she moved now. She squeezed the trigger. And the night exploded into motion. Why did the gunshot feel quieter than the pounding in her chest, quieter than the truth she'd been trying to outrun for years? The rifle cracked once, sharp and final. The guard jerked back, collapsing before he even registered the shot. Savannah didn't wait to see him fall. She moved instantly, muscle memory taking command before thought could intrude. The compound snapped awake. A shout. A door slamming open. Another voice yelling for visibility. Boots scraping against concrete. Chaos spilled across the courtyard faster than she expected. Good. Chaos was a weapon too, if you knew how to hold it. She ducked behind the shed just as 3 rounds punctured the metal, sparks flaring inches from her face. She slid across the ground, grabbing the fuel can closest to her, dragging it behind cover. Voices rose, frantic now, someone shouting for a number check, someone else cursing in Russian. Her breath stayed steady. Measured. Unshaken. She needed noise. She needed smoke. She needed confusion. Confusion turned men into targets. 2 more guards rushed from the guard shack, rifles up, scanning wildly. They were coordinated more than the others, experienced. She recognized the stance, the packing, the way they held their weapons. These weren't simple traffickers, these were ex-military. Dangerous. Her pulse didn't change. She waited, counted, watched their footwork. When they separated 6 meters apart, she rolled out, fired twice. One burst hit the man on the left, center mass, clean drop. The second spun toward her, firing reflexively. Rounds burst against the dirt behind her as she dove back behind the shed. A bullet grazed her shoulder, hot, slicing pain that spread fast. Not deep, but close. She hissed through clenched teeth. Pain was a luxury. She didn't have time for luxuries. She tossed the fuel can toward the center of the courtyard, not hard, just enough for it to roll under the flickering light. A shadow stepped into view, another guard rushing toward his fallen friend. She fired. The bullet struck the can instead. The pop was small. The fireball was not. Flames raced upward in a violent plume, igniting the spilled gasoline around it. Heat burst across the courtyard, the sudden blaze washing light across steel walls, windows, rifles, terrified faces. Shouts erupted. Men scrambled back, shielding themselves from the roar of fire. Savannah was already moving. She sprinted along the shed's shadow, sliding into a blind spot created by the fire's glare. Smoke began to spread, thick, black, fast. Perfect. As she reached the warehouse wall, she felt it again. That strange ache in her chest, deeper than exhaustion, heavier than adrenaline. She ignored it. Now was not the time to think. Inside the warehouse, she could hear Volkov yelling orders. Panic sharpened his tone. He wasn't composed anymore, not calculating, not laughing. He was afraid. Good. Fear made men sloppy. She reached the side entrance, kicked it open with her shoulder, and slid inside low, rifle raised. The scene hit her like a punch. Weapons crates overturned, papers scattered, smoke filtering in through the vents, men scrambling for cover, and Volkov standing behind a forklift barking commands, his face twisted with disbelief. He didn't recognize her at first, not through the smoke, not through the chaos, not in the middle of the assault he couldn't comprehend. Then his eyes met hers, and everything inside him froze. His mouth opened. A shocked exhale. A wordless stutter. Like he was seeing a ghost. Savannah didn't speak. Didn't smirk. Didn't offer a final line or a warning. She fired. But one of his men lunged at the same moment, shoving Volkov behind a crate. The man took the bullet meant for his boss, collapsing in a heap. Volkov disappeared behind cover, screaming for his men to flank her. Her jaw clenched, not from frustration, but from focus sharpening like a blade. Move fast, faster than fear, faster than thought. She rolled behind a stack of steel drums as rounds tore through the air, punching into crates and ricocheting off metal. Splinters and fragments peppered her face. The air filled with gunpowder, smoke, the metallic scent of fear. One guard flanked too wide. She took him down. Another broke from cover, panicked. She dropped him in 3 shots. Still more voices echoed from deeper in the warehouse. Too many. Too spread. Not enough time. She needed to break their rhythm. A flashbang hung from the belt of the man she dropped earlier. She grabbed it, pulled the pin, threw it blind across the warehouse floor. The blast detonated. Light and sound slammed the room. Men cried out, clutching their ears, stunned by the shockwave. Savannah didn't hesitate. She surged forward, weaving through crates, firelight reflecting off her wet hair, footsteps silent on the concrete. She spotted him. Volkov. Half-blinded, disoriented, fumbling with his rifle like a man holding a weapon for the first time. Her chest tightened. He wasn't a ghost from her past. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man. A man who had underestimated the wrong person. She advanced, but a sudden burst of gunfire ripped from her right. She dove behind a crate as rounds shattered wood inches from her face. A guard rushed her position, weapon raised, shouting. She swung the rifle up and fired. But the click that followed was hollow. Empty. Her stomach twisted, only for a second. She ducked as the guard lunged. He grabbed her by the shoulder, slamming her against a crate hard enough to steal her breath. She retaliated instantly, knee to his abdomen, elbow into his jaw, using momentum more than strength. He stumbled, disoriented. She seized his rifle. A clean shot. One more body hitting the concrete. Her lungs burned. Her shoulder bled. Her body trembled with the mix of cold, exertion, and the weight she carried inside. Not fear. Not trauma. Responsibility. She pressed her back against the crate, inhaling once, letting the air expand through her sore ribs. And then she heard him. Volkov. Breathing hard. Trying to run. Kicking open the warehouse's back door. He was escaping. Her mind stilled instantly. Her heartbeat steadied into precision. This was the moment training was meant for. Not the river. Not the mountain. Not even the infiltration. This decision right now. She moved silently toward the back exit, rifle ready, every muscle aligned to purpose. She pushed the door open. And froze. Because standing 20 meters ahead, gun trembling in his grip, breath fogging the night air, was the last guard she hadn't accounted for. The driver. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't advancing. He was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. Young. Shaking. Barely older than the rookies she trained years back. He didn't want to shoot. She could see it in the way his fingers trembled on the trigger. In another life, maybe he would have been someone else. A student. A kid working in a shop. A man with choices. But here, in this moment, he was a threat. And she had no room left for hesitation. She raised her rifle. He raised his. The world held its breath. And the night split open once more. Why did the young man hesitate? Why did his eyes look more afraid of himself than of her? For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Cold wind slid through the open doorway, carrying smoke, dust, and the faint metallic tang of blood. The young guard's chest heaved. His rifle shook in trembling hands. Savannah could see the moment he realized he might have to shoot, and the deeper moment he realized he didn't want to. His fear was raw, human, real. A dangerous combination in a firefight. "Drop it," Savannah said softly, voice low, steady. He flinched, not at the words but at the steadiness. Her calm rattled him more than the gun pointed at him. She saw something flicker behind his eyes, a battle between orders and instinct, between survival and conscience. I don't want," he stammered. He never finished. A voice roared behind him. "Shoot her." Volkov. The young guard jerked at the command. His finger twitched on the trigger. And in that fraction of a second, Savannah chose. Not out of anger. Not out of vengeance. But out of necessity. Her shot was clean. Precise. Merciful. The young man dropped instantly, eyes softening as if relieved. Like he'd learned something about himself in the last moment and couldn't bear it. Savannah swallowed hard, throat tightening, not from guilt but from the heaviness of choice. She didn't look away from him, not immediately. Sometimes the hardest part of surviving wasn't staying alive. It was holding onto what the uniform asked of you, and what the world demanded instead. She exhaled once, steadying herself. Then she looked up. Volkov was already moving. He sprinted up the gravel road behind the warehouse, boots scraping against rock, fear pushing him harder than any discipline ever had. He didn't look back, not once. Cowards rarely did. Savannah stepped over the fallen guard, pushing into the frigid night air. Her breath plumed in front of her as she ran, boots slamming against the ground, shoulder burning from the earlier graze. The cold stung her lungs, but she welcomed the sting. It meant she was alive. The road climbed steeply. Volkov stumbled. She closed the distance. Her footsteps echoed behind him. He heard. He panicked. "No, no, stay back," he shouted, voice breaking. He slipped on loose gravel, catching himself on a boulder. His rifle bounced across the ground, skidding out of reach. She slowed, raising her weapon, breath heavy but controlled. "Don't," she warned. "I didn't know," Volkov blurted, turning with shaking hands. "I didn't know who you were." Savannah's jaw clenched. "That wasn't the mistake," she said quietly. He pressed his back against the rock, palms raised, breath frantic. You can take me in. I'll talk. I'll give you everything. Names, routes, clients, please." His words poured out in gasps, desperate and disjointed. Fear warped his posture, made him look smaller than he had hours earlier when he stood above her on that bridge, certain she wouldn't survive the fall. Funny how quickly a man changed when he realized the person he'd tried to kill was still breathing. But something in his tone was off, wrong, panicked in a way that didn't fit surrender. She narrowed her eyes. "You're stalling," she said. "No, I am trying to live." A glint of metal flashed near his boot. A pistol, half hidden under the gravel. He lunged. She fired. The shot slammed into his shoulder, spinning him sideways into the rock. He screamed, a harsh, guttural sound, and collapsed onto one knee, clutching the wound. "Stop," she said coldly. He didn't. With his good arm, he scrabbled frantically toward the pistol again, fingers clawing through dirt, not out of bravery, out of panic. She stepped forward and kicked the weapon out of reach, sending it skittering down the slope. It tumbled into darkness. Volkov stared after it, defeated. Breathing hard, he looked up at her with shaking eyes. You should have died," he whispered. Savannah shifted her rifle, leveling it calmly. "I didn't." He laughed once, broken, terrified. "That river kills everyone." "Not me." "Then what are you?" he rasped. Savannah stared down at him, breath steady, night wind whispering through her wet hair. "A diver," she said softly. "In water I'm at home." Something changed in his face then, not fear, not anger. Recognition. Like he finally understood the weight of what he'd done, and the cost of underestimating her. He slumped against the rock, breath shaking. "You're going to kill me," he said. "No," she answered. "You're going to stand trial." He scoffed bitterly. "You think men like me survive trial? If you talk, you might." "You're lying." "I'm giving you a choice." His breath trembled, and for a moment, a flicker, she thought he might actually surrender, might see the inevitability, might accept the consequences. But some men only learn truth the hardest way. Volkov lunged again, not for a weapon, not for escape, but for her rifle, a desperate, wild grab born of fear. She sidestepped, his fingers brushed air. She fired once. The bullet hit center mass, knocking him back against the rock with a heavy thud. His breath hitched, half gasp, half shock. He looked down at the spreading red, tried to breathe through it. He slid to the ground, sitting against the stone as if resting after a long walk. His eyes fluttered. "Should have stayed dead," he murmured weakly. Savannah crouched beside him. Not close, not with empathy, but with the quiet gravity of someone who had seen death before and would see it again. "You shouldn't have thrown me in that river," she said. He exhaled once, body slackening. The mountain went still. Savannah rose slowly, the weight in her chest heavier than before. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just inevitability. She looked toward the warehouse. Smoke curled into the night sky, the fires still crackled, bodies lay where they'd fallen. The compound was silent now. Too silent. The kind of silence where adrenaline finally drains, and the truth you've been pushing down has nowhere left to hide. Her knees weakened. Not from injury, not from cold, from the truth she'd been drowning more deeply than the river. She hadn't hesitated once in the warehouse, in the forest, in the water. But now, with the mission complete, with survival no longer dictating her every breath, something beneath her ribs finally cracked open. A quiet, unwelcome thought. You're alone because you chose to be. She inhaled sharply, steadying herself. No time. Not now. Not here. She turned and made her way down the slope, scanning for threats, for movement, for anything alive in the shadows. The warehouse door was still open, smoke billowing softly outward. She stepped through the threshold, boots crunching over broken splinters and shell casings. The silence inside swallowed her whole. She lowered her rifle and finally, let her breath shake. Why did the quiet feel heavier now? Like the silence itself was asking her questions she'd spent years avoiding. Savannah stepped deeper into the warehouse, boots echoing softly against the concrete. Smoke drifted through the broken windows in slow, ghost-like tendrils. The air tasted of burned fuel, metal, and the faint sweetness of cooling blood. The bodies lay where they'd fallen, some slumped behind crates, others sprawled across the floor. Men who had believed they held all the power, men who had believed she died in the river. Her eyes moved over them without flinching, not out of coldness, out of necessity. If she let herself feel everything now, she would collapse. And collapsing wasn't an option. Not yet. Her shoulder throbbed, the graze burning with each breath. Her ribs ached from the fall, the fight, the cold. But those were physical wounds, clean, honest, they healed. What sat under her ribs, the quiet heaviness that wasn't clean, and it wasn't healing. She stepped over a broken crate, the wood splintering under her boot. A faint metallic clatter echoed from the far corner. She froze instantly, rifle raised, breath paused. But it was only a loose shell casing rolling slowly to a stop. She lowered the rifle. Her heart didn't slow. She moved toward the guard shack next, pushing the door open with her foot. Dim light flickered overhead. A coat hung on a hook, a half-eaten plate of food, a map taped to the wall. Normal things. Human things. She hated how human they were. The coat caught her eye, thick, warm, heavy wool. She grabbed it and pulled it on. The weight grounded her for a moment. The warmth softened the edge of the cold, gripping her bones. For the first time since the river, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. It hurt. Not physically. Emotionally. A crack she'd held shut with adrenaline now threatened to split open. She looked down, hands shaking. Not from cold, but from everything she'd forced herself to push down. The river. The fight. The men she'd killed. The silence she carried. And the truth she still hadn't spoken aloud. She sat on a crate, letting her body rest, not fully, just enough to stop the trembling. She rolled her shoulders back, forcing her breath to slow. She'd been awake for nearly 2 days. Fought freezing water. Climbed half a mountain. Cleared a compound alone. She had no right to feel weak. But weakness wasn't the word for what twisted in her chest. It was something older. Deeper. A feeling she'd ignored so long it now felt foreign. Loneliness. Not the physical kind. Physical loneliness she could handle. She survived worse deployments with nothing but ocean and sky around her. This was something else. She felt lonely in a way that came from silence between people, from secrets you never say out loud, from missions where attachments are liabilities, from being trained to endure everything except the parts of yourself that hurt quietly. Her breath caught sharp. She shook her head, standing. Not now. Not here. She crossed to the small desk, rummaging through drawers for anything, radio, phone, intel. Her fingers found a metal lockbox. She pried it open with the crowbar. Inside, a sat phone, 2 magazines, a map marked with 3 borders, a list of dates and names. Her breath steadied. This was why she came. This was what she risked everything for. She grabbed the phone, checked the battery, half full enough. She powered it on. The long beep cut through the silence like a lifeline. She dialed the emergency number coded to her unit. The line clicked. Static brushed her ears. Then a voice, sharp, shocked, struggling to remain composed. Chief Price, is that? How are you alive? Savannah exhaled slowly. Requesting immediate extraction. Coordinates incoming. Copy, send coordinates. Chief, we had you marked MIA. I know. Her voice didn't waver. Compound secured, all hostiles down. Intel recovered, primary objective completed. Silence, a different kind of silence. Then, we're sending a bird, ETA 2 hours. 2 hours? 2 hours felt both impossible and manageable. Any injuries? The voice asked carefully. She looked down at her shoulder. The bullet graze had soaked through the shirt, dark red against the fabric. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Her legs burned from hours of movement. I'm mobile, she said simply. Chief, that's not what I asked. Her throat tightened. I can hold for extraction. Another pause, longer this time, heavier. Understood. She ended the call. The phone felt heavy in her hand, not from weight, from finality. For the first time since the river, she let herself breathe without purpose, without strategy, without urgency. She leaned against the desk, eyes closing for a moment. Her mind drifted. To her team back home. To the people who thought she was dead. To the unanswered message she'd left before this mission. The one she still hadn't had the courage to face. We'll talk when I'm back. But she hadn't gone back. She disappeared. And maybe part of her believed she deserved to. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk, gripping it hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She inhaled deeply, steadying the tremor in her chest. The quiet made her remember things she tried to forget. A voice from months ago. A conversation she'd cut short. You can't keep going on missions like this, Sav. One day you won't come back. She hadn't answered. Not because she disagreed, but because she didn't know how to say she didn't mind. Coming back wasn't the hard part. Living with herself afterward was. A distant clang echoed outside. Her eyes snapped open. Rifle up instantly. She stepped toward the door, breath silent, muscles ready. She pushed it open slowly. Just the wind. The fire cracking. Metal settling in cooling air. She lowered her weapon again, the tension in her muscles loosening. Then she heard it. A soft crunch of gravel. Not wind. Not settling metal. Footsteps. Her heartbeat slowed. Her mind sharpened. Her body aligned to instinct. Whoever it was, they were still alive. Still moving. Still close. She stepped out into the courtyard, rifle raised, scanning the shadows. Smoke curled across the ground like low fog. A figure emerged slowly from behind the burning shed. Limping. Wounded. Dragging a weapon. She recognized him instantly. Dmitri. Volkov's lieutenant. Not dead. Not finished. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief. You, he hissed through bloody teeth, you just don't die. Savannah's breath froze for a second. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure anymore if survival was her strength. Or her curse? Why did he still stand? Why did some enemies refuse to fall even after the world tried to bury them? The smoke parted just enough for Savannah to see Dmitri clearly. His face was pale from blood loss, one leg dragging uselessly behind him, but his eyes burned with something fierce and wild. Hatred, maybe, or disbelief that a woman he'd watched get thrown off a bridge now stood in front of him, breathing the same mountain air. He clutched his rifle like it was the only thing holding him upright. "You should have drowned," he spat. "Nobody survives that river. Nobody survives us." Savannah stepped forward slowly, rifle raised, breath steady despite the cold, despite the exhaustion dragging through every muscle. "Maybe," she said, "but I did." He laughed, a broken, bitter sound that cracked at the end. "Volkov was right, you're not human." She shook her head once. "I'm just trained, and I didn't panic." His jaw tightened. "You are lying, you're afraid. I saw your eyes when we grabbed you. You were terrified." Savannah didn't flinch. Fear isn't the enemy, it's what keeps you alive. Dmitri staggered another step toward her, dragging the rifle, breath rasping. "You think you won? You think killing us stops anything?" His voice cracked. "We're not the only ones." "I know," she said softly, "but tonight it's enough." He snarled, raising the weapon with shaking hands. Savannah's breath slowed. She centered her stance, exhaled once through her nose. Dmitri fired. His shot went wide, the bullet punching into a crate behind her. He cursed, lifting the rifle again, but Savannah didn't give him time for another mistake. Her shot was clean. Final. Quiet. Dmitri's body folded inward, collapsing into the dirt like the last breath of a dying fire. The mountain wind caught his coat, lifting it slightly before settling it flat. Silence pooled around her again. Heavy. Cold. Complete. Savannah lowered her rifle. For a moment she just stood there, watching the smoke curl and fade into the night sky. The flames from the burning shed crackled softly, sparks floating upward like fireflies. It was over. The compound. The threat. The men who thought they could erase her. But something inside her didn't feel finished. She turned away from Dmitri's body and made her way back to the warehouse entrance. Her legs felt heavier than before. The adrenaline had finally drained, leaving soreness behind, deep, bone-level exhaustion that threatened to pull her to her knees. 2 hours, she reminded herself. Just hold on for 2 hours. Inside the warehouse, she found a crate sturdy enough to sit on. She sank down, letting her arms rest loosely at her sides. The thick coat she'd taken from the guard's shack wrapped around her like a shield against the cold. For a long time she just breathed. The kind of breathing that wasn't tactical. Not combat-ready. Not controlled. Just breathing because she was still here. She stared at the ground, unfocused. The room felt too quiet, too still, like her mind had finally caught up with her body and wasn't sure what to do now that survival wasn't demanding every second. Her eyes drifted to the door. To the river. To the memories she'd shoved aside. 3 days tied to a chair. 3 days wondering if anyone would notice she was gone. 3 days hearing her interrogators laugh when she stayed silent. "Why don't you speak?" one had asked her. She hadn't answered. Because the truth she carried wasn't something she could afford to give away. Not to them, not to anyone. Not even to the person she'd left behind at home. A thought cut through her quiet, a memory sharper than pain. A message she never sent. Words she never said. A conversation she promised but never delivered. "You can talk to me, Sav, about anything. You don't always have to be the one who holds everything in." She had wanted to believe that, but she didn't know how. So she swallowed it. Like she swallowed fear. Like she swallowed guilt. Like she swallowed everything that didn't serve the mission. And now, sitting alone in a warehouse full of smoke and silence, she felt the weight of that choice settle in her chest like stone. Not regret. Not exactly. Something quieter, softer, sadder. A small click echoed from her boot as she shifted, metal tapping against concrete. Not a threat, not danger. Just her body reminding her she was still functional, still present, still here. She stood slowly, brushing dust off her hands. Her body protested, muscles trembling beneath the surface, but she pushed through it. She walked outside into the cold night. The stars stretched across the sky in long, sharp streaks of silver. The river roared faintly in the distance. The wind whispered through the pines. A sound she hadn't realized she needed. The helicopter wouldn't arrive for another hour. She walked toward the edge of the compound, standing near the ridge where she could see the faint glimmer of the river far below. It looked almost beautiful from here. Dark, dangerous, alive, just like her. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not to rest, not to escape, but to acknowledge something she had avoided for so long. She was tired, not of the job, not of the danger, tired of carrying everything alone. Her breath shook once, she steadied it. The wind brushed her hair back from her face. In the quiet, one thought settled in her mind, soft, clear, unflinching. You survived because you refused to let the world decide your ending. And maybe that's what strength really was. Not the ability to fight. Not the ability to kill. Not even the ability to survive. But the ability to stay human in a world that kept trying to strip that from you. In the distance, she heard the faint chop of rotor blades. Extraction. She stepped back from the ridge, letting the noise grow louder, letting the night shift around her as the helicopter descended. She didn't smile, didn't sigh, didn't let herself collapse. She simply stood there, quiet, steady, unbroken. And as the floodlight washed over her, catching every bruise and cut, every scar and shadow, she thought one final truth that settled the evening like a closing chapter. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be seen. Sometimes dignity simply acts, and lets the world realize too late that they never understood its strength.